but very rarely does somebody come in with an envelope of cash or a pocket full of cash. I mean, especially nowadays, everything's, a credit card or even a check. But rarely are you like, here's cash and what do I do? How do I make sure this is accounted for, right? Because we obviously have a duty to protect that money. It's not our money until the work is done.
I was like, what am I supposed to do?
Yeah.
Right? Because in law school, we learn about the rules of evidence, right? We learn about, the certain elements that are involved when you're bringing claims before the court. But, how to then apply that in the real life setting where someone's going to rely on you is just a whole different story.
So I ended up going to LA for a month and actually ended up working as like a paparazzi.
You talk about insurances. Like, insurance is never going to be enough when you have someone who loses their life. I'm Isaiah Jerez. This is Turning Point's Covenant of Justice. Today we have attorney David Markman, and him and I share something in common in that we started our legal career working for a very shady attorney. We both learned from that experience the importance of building trust with our clients and communicating with them.
Thanks for the introduction, Isaiah. My name is David Markman. I'm an attorney here in Las Vegas, and I'm here to, fight on everyone's behalf, try to make sure everyone gets the most money. If you feel you've been wronged by a corporation, a business, and you need help with that as well, I'm here to fight for your rights because we do know that these big companies don't take our individual rights and liberties serious.
My very first job as an associate was for an attorney that was super shady. After law school, I went and worked for a judge and worked as a clerk, basically like an apprenticeship. And it was 2009, 2010, really hard to find a job because of the economy here in Las Vegas. So I ended up getting a job with this attorney, Barry Levinson. And when I told one of the judges who I was going to work with, he looked at me like, "Are you serious?" But I didn't have any other job, and I had 2 kids that I needed to support. And so I took the job and went into it. And I believe one of your very first jobs as an attorney was also with Barry Levinson. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. My first job was also with Barry Levinson. And I didn't have the exact same experience, but I had a pretty similar experience when I told someone I was going to stop doing some like hourly work for them. I was going to go for Barry Levinson, like they kind of get that gasp, and it was just on the phone, but I didn't know why, and I would later find out very quickly.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, even though he was shady, I really liked him. I didn't like what he did, but when I look back at him, I think, man, here's a guy whose life was meant for good intentions. Like we have the saying, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. I think he had a lot of good intentions, and it just at some point got so deep he just couldn't turn back and head back in the right direction.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense knowing him because he was like a good person. A lot of people liked him. There was always people around who were his friends who maybe, I don't know what their actual relationships were, but it seemed like he was always trying to do his best. But by the time I got there, he was just way out over his skis and just, you could kind of see that it was falling apart. But it took, a couple months to really figure out that that's what was happening.
For a lot of attorneys, their downfall starts because either they're messing around with hookers, or here in Las Vegas especially, they're gambling, or they have a drinking problem. But I never saw any of that in him, and actually I saw kind of a reverse. Like I never saw him drink, and I saw him always on the phone with his kids. He was always in contact with his wife all the time, and so he appeared to me to be a good family man, and just, like you said, over his skis, overstretched himself, and financially was put in a tough situation probably.
Yeah, that's kind of what it seemed like because he was there. Like his wife would come or his kids would come or they were around and they were always, around or mentioned. And you never saw like you said, it's not like we'd go out to lunch and he was drinking at lunch or, he was doing anything like that. He always seemed to be not partaking in those type of activities, or at least if he did, he didn't, boast about them. But obviously, I think as we both later came to find out, like he was very financially extended and he was not protecting the client's, money or financial interests and was instead actually kind of dipping into that money.
Yeah, and it's sad because a lot of the, like you kind of touched on, a lot of his clients or his friends, they really liked him. Like you would walk into the office and it would be a busy office, something that you would almost see on TV where there are clients constantly in the office and staff's always moving around trying to help people out. And it was that type of environment. I think initially, like I was like, oh, holy cow, this is exciting. Like I'm an attorney. I'm like an attorney like those on TV.
Yeah, I kind of had that same thing because, you know, it was very fast paced, very hustle and bustle. People are coming in, you're meeting with them, you're going to court, you're doing all these things that what you think like on TV an attorney is supposed to do, and then you talk to, like I was talking to my friends at the time, and they're sitting in the office and they're writing papers, and which we find out which is what attorneys really do, you know.
Yeah.
And so it always seemed like he was trying to help. There was always a lot of people around, and you know, he had a lot of people, and he was always, remember he had like a radio show, and he had a lot of, you know, at least in the past, famous clients, and he would, you know, they would, you know, that had vouch for him and all these things, but it just didn't. I guess, you know, you don't really know it when you're first starting, but when you really kind of look back at it, it's like he was not doing good legal work.
Yeah, and that had the same experience, and hopefully we can get you to share some about those first experiences in the courtroom, because that's what he did to me, is kind of threw me right into the courtroom and without much training, right? Like one example is I was down at the courthouse and I'm walking around, and large building, right? I'm trying to figure out where my case is going to be heard. I'm looking around, and this guy walks up to me and pulls out a wad of cash and says, "Hey, are you an attorney?" And Barry gave me no direction as to what to do at that point, right? And I was just like stumbling over my words. I didn't know what to say. This guy is flashing a bunch of cash at me. And, you know, it's, you know, I was thinking, what am I supposed to do? Am I supposed to have him sign a retainer agreement? Am I just supposed to take his money and then go show up at criminal court and say, hey, I'm representing this guy? And what am I supposed to do? Yeah. And I was just so set back by that. And I think now looking back, it's like, that doesn't happen very often, where you have a client just flashing cash in front of you.
Yeah, I mean, I think I very rarely get paid any cash, and I take, you know, certain cases where there's, you know, retainer agreements, and, you know, but very rarely does somebody come in with an envelope of cash or a pocket full of cash. I mean, especially nowadays, everything's, you know, a credit card or even a check, but rarely are you like, here's cash, and what do I do? How do I make sure this is accounted for, right? Because we obviously have a duty to protect that money. It's not our money until the work is done. So it's, I mean, that obviously is like kind of a crazy scenario for you to kind of step into, especially as a young attorney. And I definitely, I mean, I remember like going to court, and it was like a big hearing, and I was just completely unprepared. I was a brand new attorney. I had really no clue about all the things that I needed to do leading up to what essentially is a motion for summary judgment in a bankruptcy proceeding.
A motion for summary judgment is what?
In a motion for summary judgment is basically a motion to try to end the case, saying there's nothing factually in dispute at this time. If you look at the law, you look at the facts, and you apply the two, then this can only result in one way, and that's for the other party to win, or a party to win. In my case, it was for the other party to win. And I got into the, you know, federal bankruptcy court, and it's called an adversary proceeding, but it essentially was a motion for summary judgment filed in this proceeding, and he just completely unprepared to deal with it. And I still remember the opposing attorney to this day, because it shocked me so much. And this is within my first month or two. They don't prepare you for this kind of thing in law school, right? And in theory, the lawyer's supposed to teach you and make sure you go through these steps, because these aren't steps that are always addressed in law school. And I go and I pretty much get smacked around by the other attorney and the judge.
And the judge. And the judge is smacking you around too.
And
Ouch.
the judge, yeah. Luckily, I recall being able to kind of get it to a position where they would allow another hearing to happen. And then another attorney had started at that time, and he was an older attorney, and he ended up kind of picking up that hearing. I don't think it went any better when he got there. But it was just a situation where he just kind of set you up for failure. And to this day, I'll always remember the other attorney and how bad she smacked me around as a brand new attorney. And then luckily, or I don't know about luckily, but eventually I had a case with her, now as an experienced attorney, and I was able to get much better results against her.
Yeah. When I was there for a couple of months, and he sprung 2 trials on me, both of them the night before, coming into my office and saying, hey, we've got this trial tomorrow on both cases.
Wow, that's crazy.
And that was the way that it worked, right? Is, hey, you've got this motion to argue, and you got to be there tomorrow, and here's the file.
Right, but like for a motion, it's a lot obviously simpler, as we know, to go prepare for a motion hearing. In theory, you're limited to what's in the pleadings. You're limited to these certain things. Where a trial, I mean, anything can happen. For someone to spring a trial on you as a brand new attorney, that's just insane.
Yeah, I was excited, right? I mean, for me, it was like, okay, I'm just getting the chance to do it. But yeah, looking back, there was a lot of prep that goes into trial. And the first one that I did, both of them were bench trials, but the first one that I did, I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to go sit and I'm going to watch Barry do this, and I'm going to learn, right? He just told me about it last night.
Okay.
So I get there and he's saying, hey, you're sitting first chair. Basically, I'm the one that's going to be leading the trial, and he's going to sit second chair. And then right after opening statements, like, he just takes off and he leaves me there all by myself. He's like, oh, you got it. Don't worry about it. And I was blown away. I was like, what am I supposed to do?
Yeah.
Right? Because in law school, we learn about the rules of evidence, right? We learn about, the certain elements that are involved when you're bringing claims before the court. But, how to then apply that in the real life setting where someone's going to rely on you is just a whole different story.
Oh yeah, I mean that's absolutely insane that he would get up and leave after closing, especially if he tells you the night before you're going to trial, you thinking you're going to be second chair, and second chair is, basically you sit there, you kind of help out, you get some stuff, you maybe examine a witness or two in a bench trial, right? But you're not in charge of leading the whole thing, and then he just drops that on you and says, "All right, I'm out." That's pretty nuts. That's pretty intense.
Yeah.
And that one would be hard to like just pick up and go, because I imagine you probably don't even know the case that well at that point.
Yeah, you don't know any of the facts, right? I mean, the facts are very limited, and it's just a matter of, trying to think on your feet and being there for the client and try to represent the client and stand up for them. But at that point, it's, brand new attorney with no real knowledge as to what's going on in the case, and it was a very humbling experience for sure.
Were you able to kind of pull it together, or how did that end up working out?
No,
for you?
we lost, right? I mean, it was, we lost, and then after we lost, that Barry wanted me to go to the client and ask the client for money. So, the client signed a retainer agreement and owed some money on the retainer agreement, and what do I do, right? I mean, all of a sudden I turn from, a trial attorney to a collections agent trying to collect money from this client who, lost their case. And it opened my eyes a lot, right, as to what our role means in people's lives, because they rely on us. They rely on us a lot, right? They pay us really good money, and the money that they pay us is something that's very important to them, and they expect strong representation.
Yeah, I mean, they're putting it pretty much all into your hands because they don't obviously understand the process. Not many people do. A lot of people have read Google, or they have a friend or obviously an uncle who's told them what it's like, but there's so many gaps in that knowledge that you only get from obviously being very experienced or having experience in doing those things. And you get thrown into that fire, the next thing you know, you lose the trial. Now you got to go ask the guy for money. And people don't understand that. I mean, you still should be compensated for your time, win or lose. But, that they obviously, expect you to come in prepared and not have the attorney they thought was going to represent them walk out at that time, I'm sure.
Yeah, and it's another thing at that, there were several things that Barry did wrong, but I think one of them was that trust in the client. He was a very good salesman, right? He could get them in the door, he could get them to sign on the dotted line, but then how do you maintain that trust with your clients? And one thing that I saw for him is there was just a lack of communication. A lot of the clients that I was brought in to work with, they hadn't been spoken to for months, and they had no idea what was going on with their case. And you see the effect of that is that, you know, you end up with a loser. And that's what happened in that first trial, right? There was no communication. So, you know, we didn't have the documents that we needed to prove the client's case. Right. And so if you don't have the facts, you're not going to win. If you don't have the evidence, you're not going to win.
Yeah, because, I mean, obviously to get ready for trial, what we all know now, which, I mean, I wouldn't have known as a brand new attorney, or I'm sure you didn't know at that time, is you have to have already all those exhibits marked. You have to know where you want to use them in evidence, how you're going to get them into evidence, who you're going to use to get them into evidence, because, you know, it could be hearsay or it could be any litany of things, right? So, I mean, that's why there's all that trust in the attorney, and we have to communicate as attorneys with our clients. And sometimes it's hard to communicate with all your clients all the time, right? But you have to make that effort to do it because it is so important.
Yeah, and I think for myself, one of the things that I've really done now, the biggest learning lesson is I over-prepare. Because I know if I over-prepare, that's going to be better than under-preparing, because at least I'm going to know the file backward and forward, and as well to know what direction the defense is going to come from, where they're going to attack us, and then to be ready for that and have the evidence or the argument to address that particular issue. So going back to that hearing on the motion for summary judgment they got thrown into, what was your biggest takeaway from that?
I mean, it was preparation, it was procedure. Because of what happened was, you know, if I remember right, it was about the affidavit. And, you know, and so for a motion for summary judgment, you need an affidavit, because you as the attorney, you can't just argue it. You need someone to back those facts up, and you got to attach exhibits to it. And I think the big issue was there was no like affidavit or declaration attached. And so none of it was evidence that could be used to oppose the summary judgment. And so it's just going into procedure and learning and knowledge, because these are things you obviously acquire over a long period of time, and learning the rules of the court. Because even as an attorney, I routinely go against attorneys that don't know the rules. They don't know the rules of evidence. They don't know the Nevada rules of civil procedure. And if you aren't up on that and you don't pay attention to those, there's a lot of technicalities that can trip you up. So it's just expanding your knowledge, because it's very much a knowledge-based profession, right? It's not about how strong you are or how loud you are or how aggressive you are, right? Everyone says, oh, I want the aggressive attorney but aggressiveness is not about getting loud with the other side. It's about preparing and taking strategic advantages.
Yeah, so that's what you do in your practice now, is being aggressive. You're taking those strategic opportunities to put your client in the best position. That's
right.
Yeah.
And that's what it is, right? But if you say that to most clients, they don't understand that, right? They assume aggressiveness is being loud or just filing things or just doing, which is not what we do, right? Because you don't want to waste your client's time. You don't want to waste your client's money. If they're paying you hourly, you have to take a strategic advantage so that you're getting good value for that. So that is kind of the approach that you have to take now. But what I found even, is that doesn't always translate to a client understanding that this is assertive or this is aggressive. Because if you're not on the phone barking at the other attorney, then they don't see the show. Right? And so they don't understand the positions that you're using to put them in. It's a chess, right? It's not checkers.
And that type of respect, where you're very strategic in filing motions, you're very strategic in your communications with opposing counsel, with the other side, I think that ends up resulting in a lot of respect with the court and with other attorneys as well. I remember as a young attorney, when I went to a different firm, I worked for insurance defense, and the insurance defense firms have this reputation for filing a bunch of motions in limine, or basically motions to try to keep certain evidence out. And a lot of these motions in limine are just an opportunity for the insurance company to bill, and they get in front of the judge, and the judge is like, "What, you're telling me to follow the law? Of course I'm going to follow the law." But when I was a young attorney at the second firm that I worked with, I was very strategic in that as well, where I didn't file this litany of motions that addressed all types of little issues. I was very deliberate in what I was bringing up that was going to make an impact on the case. And I remember being in front of a judge, and we ended up having to continue the motions. But the judge he expressed his respect for that. He's like, yeah, he said, "Hey, this is wonderful because this isn't just the boilerplate motions. These are actually motions that I have to rule on." Right. And it feels like that respect that you earn with your judge, and being strategic and being respectful, not shouting, it goes much longer. It goes much further than just being that bulldog in the courtroom.
Yeah, and that makes sense because a lot of what our profession is about is credibility, right? I mean, credibility from the attorneys. You want to be credible with the judge. You want the judge that when you file something that they're going to actually read it. I mean, we know how busy these judges are. We know, kind of more how the sausage is made, right? So you want that when you file something that they're going to look at it, right? And it's the same thing we tell our clients, right? It's, you have to be credible. If you're not honest at any point, that can really harm your case. And there's nothing that can harm your case more than not being honest, right? You can pretty much be a felon. You could have all kinds of different issues, right? You can be pretty much do absolutely anything. You can have past injuries. You can have everything. But if you start to lie about them and you're not honest, that's pretty much the easiest way to sink the ship.
And drawing this back to Barry, so one of the clients that I represented when I was working with Barry, we prepared for the motion. We got in to the courtroom, or even going to the courtroom, the client wanted me to lie about something. And right, of course, I'm an officer of the court, cannot lie, but I'm not going to lie either, right? And so I went in there, and we lost the motion, and it came out, and the client got irate with me, basically asking me why didn't I lie, and I wasn't going to lie for him, right? And I think that was one thing where Barry was willing to cross the line ethically, where the clients that were coming to him, right, they were looking for that attorney that would cross the line, right, that would blur the ethical lines and move the other direction. And, I think that's why he had a good following. That's why he had a lot of friends, is because he was willing to go to bat for him regardless of what the consequence was going to be for himself.
Yeah, I mean, that was kind of something that he said to me, I think towards the end of me kind of working there, which obviously wasn't very long, was like, it was almost like, be cautious of your friends. Because even though all these people were like his friends, obviously they had been taking advantage of him for so long. At least a big percentage of them. I'm sure not all of his clients, but enough that got him dug into a hole that it seemed like he, looking back at it, was scrambling to get out of, or just trying to keep afloat. So you can't just do something because someone else wants you to do it. Obviously, we all know that. But it seemed like Barry was trying that at times. And I mean, I don't know how he was as an attorney, because I think he was an attorney 20 years or so. And I mean, I met him or worked for him probably very much towards the end, shortly before that. I think the indictment came out maybe a few months after I quit there. Mm-hmm. It might have been a little bit longer. I could be mixing that up.
And initially he was indicted for the HOA, because there was some fraudulent claims with regards to HOA claims, right?
Yeah, that's my understanding of what he was actually indicted for, because ultimately I think what he went to prison for was that HOA case where it was about like ballot rigging. And obviously it was a big thing here in Las Vegas for a while if you followed the legal stuff and the fallout and some of the HOA stuff. But yeah, that's ultimately what he was indicted for, from what I recall. And I think during that time is when they kind of finally talked about how many bar complaints he had, all the missing money, all the other things that you can't really tell, even if you're working in the building, because these are things that are pretty much hidden from you, or are without outside of your job duties, and so you wouldn't see this, and so you're just doing your thing in this company, and you don't see that all these other things are happening under the surface.
Yeah, he just says, hey, here's your caseload, work on these cases. And there's a lot of business side that is just not available to you, not even your responsibility to look at. And so you're just kind of focused on representing the clients to the best of your ability.
Right, because when I was there, we didn't have any responsibility for collecting money as the attorney. We didn't have to get the retainers. We weren't doing client meetings, like initial client meetings to sign clients up. So that was never within the job prospects. By the time it usually got to me, because most of his cases were bankruptcy, you were kind of going to court, and so you didn't see the money. You didn't hear the client say, "I paid this money," or "This money came in," or you just weren't involved with that.
And some of his friends were allegedly shady characters as well. I remember one luncheon where there was an article in the newspaper, and all of a sudden I find myself in the back room of a restaurant with this guy that was in the newspaper and talking about what was in the article. And I was speechless. I was tongue-tied. And at that point, I realized how important attorney-client privilege is, right? I mean, we had set up this meeting, or Barry had set up this meeting in a very discreet location where he could speak, very honestly and bluntly with his friend who was facing an indictment himself. And the details that were addressed during that meeting, you as an attorney, and aside from the fact that Barry was a bit shady, I think he really wanted to help his friends out, right? And he wanted to use his knowledge and his acumen of the law to provide benefit. And one of the most important things that I stress to my clients is, you can trust me. You can tell me things. I'm not going to tell anybody. And as a young attorney, I think one positive thing that I learned from Barry was that, right? Like, you've got to be able to take your friends and your clients' deepest, darkest secrets and keep them to yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people, especially as an attorney, they trust in you for that, right? And even as I've learned as a lawyer, the attorney-client privilege isn't as all-encompassing as I thought it was when I first started. I think as an attorney, we're sounding boards. I mean, we're psychologists to some degree, right? People come to us with usually at the lowest of the low, right? Whether it's in the accident, they're in a lot of pain, their car's gone, they don't have any money, they don't know what to do, and they're stressing, and plus they have all these other things going on in their life, and they come to us and they want to talk to us and tell us these things. And we have to hold that in. We have to hold that kind of that water for them, that weight for them. And so I never had that kind of experience with Barry where we had this kind of like super secret meeting. But I know in the profession, obviously, it's just very important that you can be trusted and you can kind of hold that water for your clients.
Yeah, and sometimes your clients don't want to be judged either, right? They just want to feel like, they want you to be their punching bag, right? Where they can just spill everything out and leave it all on your shoulders. And then sometimes as an attorney, like we've got to judge them for that, right? We've got to really hit them on those points, because if the defense finds out, they're going to be hitting them on those same exact points. So we've got to get them prepared on how to react in those situations.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much one of the most important things we can do is to prepare them, especially that stuff that's going to come out during their case or during their deposition. We have to, take that and explain to them or how they should, we have to help them through that so that when they are, facing the defense attorneys or the other attorney, that they are prepared for that. Because the other attorney, as we know, they're going to come to the deposition, and most attorneys, effective attorneys, are going to be pretty, nice and try to really get you to open up before they kind of cut you down. And so you have to help your client get ready for that. And by knowing some of that information, you can help address those concerns.
Yeah. There was the other trial that I did with Barry. It was there was this one document, and it ended up turning the trial, but I had no idea what to do with it. And I'm looking to Barry for help on trying to figure out what to do with it, and he wasn't giving me any help. And I'm looking toward the client, and the client wouldn't tell me, right? And so I had no idea how to address this document with the court. And that document ended up being the linchpin. It ended up being the destruction of the case later on. And I think in large part it was because the client never opened up to me, and I didn't have that guidance from Barry, right? Barry didn't say, this is how we address this. And that I think was another lesson to me. Like I've got to have good mentors. I've got to have good people that I can turn to, that when I'm put in that situation where I have a problem that I don't know how to address, I can go to them. And I can say, hey, like, how have you dealt with this before? How can I address this fact?
Right. And I mean, that's so important in law, because there's no clear answer, right? And so it's really about trying to get to the best way to approach something. Because of the law, it's, first the law is kind of gray. It gets interpreted a lot of different ways. That's why you see certain, you can see a Supreme Court opinion and 4 judges go this way, 3 go the other way. Or, if it's the U.S. Supreme Court, it's 5 and 4, because you can interpret it differently. And then being able to take those facts and address them with, the prior case law and the prior statutes, it's super important, but you have to know how to address them, which is where, like you said, the attorney-client privilege comes in. And it's very important that the client can tell you what's going on with this document or this evidence, so that you can try to figure out how to fit it into the law and how to make it advantageous, or at least as least harmful to you as possible. Because sometimes there's really nothing you can really do, but you can try to limit that damage.
Yeah, and one of the great ways to limit the damage is to look back at the evidence rules, right? To, if you know where the document comes from, if you know what the purpose of the document is, even if it's going to affect you, at least you can start to then rely back on the evidence rules if you can really understand what the origin of the document is.
Right.
Right. And so, and again, it's a two-way street, that communication, right? Like I really focus on communicating with my clients, but I need it from them as well. I need that communication from them, because we're going to work together as a team.
Yeah. I mean, communication is key, right? It's very key with your client. And I think if you ask, like you were talking about earlier, most clients are like, they don't hear from their attorneys enough. And I think most attorneys would like to talk to their clients probably more often, just to help, understand more and to be able to help them better. But we live in the real world. Everyone's very busy. And so it becomes that extra effort, or that even that comfortability where your client's comfortable talking to you, so that they don't feel like you have to pull that from them, where they can just kind of open up and talk to you. But again, that comes from communications, right?
Yeah. And so I guess my question was going to be, but it sounds like you answered it, getting those clients to open up to you and to provide that, those details that are going to be needed on their case. It sounds to me like the way that you do that is just by communicating continually with your clients, so that your clients know they can talk to you. Or is there something else that you do?
I try to communicate with my clients as much as possible. I think it's obvious, it's very important. But again, I think there's times where it's, I wish I could talk to them more, right? And I wish I could to do it more. But I try to make sure my phone is always open, and I try to take the calls when I can, which is pretty much always, because I always want to, talk to them and hear what they want and what they're looking for. So I do try to make myself available. Pretty much all of my clients can reach me on my cell phone at this point. So I do try to go that extra step. But at times, maybe there's not a lot going on in their case, because we know litigation, it kind of goes in these ebbs and flows. Sometimes there's a lot going on. You're talking to your client all the time. Sometimes there's not really much going on, and there's not maybe as much communication. So it's definitely a balancing act. And I think, like, sometimes you just have to calendar a phone call with your client, right? But again, sometimes that's the difference between the real world and best practices.
Right. Yeah. Going back to Barry, I was only there for a little over a couple of months, and I you could see that things weren't operating necessarily the way they should, but I had a young family and I wasn't getting paid. And one day he had come up to the office and he says, "Hey, no, I haven't paid you yet. So here's some cash. And I gave you, whatever, a couple extra $100 or whatever, to cover, for that." And he just gives me a wad of cash and then walks downstairs. And then I open up the wad of cash and it's nowhere near what he was supposed to pay me. And I went back down there and I addressed it with him, and he's like, didn't have an answer, right? I mean, it was that point where, I'm sitting there trying to help him with all of his clients, and he was being even shady with me and trying to lie on how much money he's giving me.
Yeah, I mean, I experienced something similar, and but it kind of obviously went down a little bit differently for me. I was there, so I think I was there about 2 months. And you can start to see some of the behind the curtains. You can't really tell what's going on because it's 2 months, your first lawyer job. You don't know how a law firm's supposed to really operate at this point. And then at 2 months, my paycheck, it doesn't come in. I think it's, so I don't get my first paycheck. It's missing. And then I go, where's my money? Where's the paycheck? Oh, I'm a little behind. I'm going to have money coming in. And then another 2 weeks goes by. Still no check. Still no check from the last check, or no money from the last check. And then eventually he gives me some cash, and it basically covers that last paycheck, but now he's still 2 weeks behind. And it's like you were saying, it's how am I going to help all these other people when I'm not even financially secure myself? Because we came out, or at least I came out, I think a couple years after you, and it was a very tough job market. And came out, and everyone was trying to get a job. Everyone couldn't get a job. Everyone was waiting, and so he was the first person to offer me a job. And so I got that job, and then maybe 2 weeks to a month later, I started getting calls for interviews afterwards. But I didn't really know at that point. I was like, oh, this is kind of cool. It's neat. I'm going to court. I'm doing these things, So it was kind of like that. If you watch TV, right, like the Better Call Saul, you feel like you're kind of cool, but you don't understand that it's actually shady, like Better Call Saul at this point. You're
Right.
just like, this is like TV lawyering, which is a lot different than actual lawyering. And then, I call my dad at that point. I say, "Dad, I'm getting these other interviews. What do you think?" And my dad had the old school mindset. He said, "You took the job. You promised them your word. You should stick with that, and do what you lived up to and what you said." And I mean, it turned out to be really bad advice. Like a month later, and it was probably good advice, like back in the day when companies cared for you and took care of you. But obviously in the modern economy, I would have been better off looking for a job that would have lasted, because I think it was about maybe a month after I got that advice, maybe 2 months. It could have been 2 months. It was probably a month after I got the advice that I wasn't getting paid, and then maybe another month before I left. Mm-hmm. But all those job interviews had dried up.
Ouch.
Yeah. So then I ended up quitting Barry's with no job and no interviews lined up. And, so it was an interesting time. That but you just don't know, because I feel like the old school mindset. It was good then, right? You promise someone your word. At this point he was still he's paying me, right?
Right.
He's living up to his end of the bargain. He gave you a job while you were looking for, jobs, and then, but it turned out to be pretty bad advice.
Yeah. I remember when, so I was recognizing I had to get out of there. So I started interviewing and looking for some other jobs. And luckily I had a friend that hooked me up and got me a couple of interviews, because I wasn't getting anything. It was just radio silence. And so I had a couple of interviews, one at a really large firm here in town, and they're like, "Oh yeah, great." And so they were during the interview, they're talking about, what do we have him do? And then one of them jokes, like, oh, we got a room full of boxes back there. It'll tie him up for a couple of years. And like looking back, like they really did. Like that was really my plan, or their plan for me was to throw me into a room, the size, 10 by 10 with just a bunch of boxes and just to go through it and do doc review for a couple of years. And the other one was it was another solo practitioner, but really nice guy. And the big firm, they asked me, well, what did the solo practitioner offer you? And I told them, and then they offered me like $500 more a year. And so it was just kind of a slap in the face. But I went back and I told Barry, hey, I'm giving you my 2 weeks, right? I gave him, even though he wasn't paying me on time, I said, hey, I'm giving you my 2 weeks. Kind of going back to what your dad said, like, hey, you kind of committed yourself to this. I've got to do it. Didn't want to burn any bridges. And so I gave, Barry my 2 weeks. And at that point, he's started saying, hey, like, what if I promise that I'm going to pay you on time? And it's just, I couldn't trust him.
Right. At that point, you can't trust him, right? Because he's not paying you, and he's waiting for you to go find another job. Now he's going to start paying you on time. That's not very trustworthy right there.
But it was that same mentality. It's like, hey, like, okay, I've been thrown into a couple of trials, right? But which I wanted, right? I wanted to do trials, and I've been thrown into other situations that are, kind of what I want to be. I want to be there for someone. I want to be in that back room, right, with someone and try to help them out. I want to be there in front of a judge or a jury and try to help someone out. And he was given that opportunity to do that. And I was thinking maybe it'll be different, right? If I stick around a little bit, now I'm going to know what the calendar is. Now I'm going to be able to prepare. I can be a little bit more, be a little bit more prepared because of the time. But financially, it just wasn't feasible. And then it ended up being the right decision because he was taking money from clients.
Yeah. I mean, I found out, I think right before I quit, that he was taking money from clients because he sent me to a settlement conference, which is where you're trying to, settle a case. I think it was a personal injury case. Mm-hmm. And we go to this mandatory settlement conference, and it comes out during the settlement conference that there was multiple insurance companies involved, and one of them had already paid their policy. And I didn't know it going in. The client had no idea the money had been paid. And so eventually after that settlement conference, I go and find out that apparently the money had been paid, and, had to tell the client, look, you got to, talk to Barry because I don't know where the money is. Because normally you can't pay it out anyways, right, until you have all the money, But the client should know that the money had came in. The client should know that the money is sitting in the trust account. And I think that was pretty much, I think, the last straw for me when I found that out. I think that was the end of me working there. Even though I hadn't got paid for the 3 or 4 weeks, that was close to a trigger, obviously. But the real trigger was finding out, like, this guy just has not been doing ethically what he needed to do at that point.
Yeah, I mean, that's hard, right? Because the client turns to you. It's like, hey, David, help me, right? And now you're like the young associate that's not getting paid. and right, and then what did Barry say, right? You go ask Barry where the money is, and I'm sure he gave you some excuse, right?
Yeah, I can't remember exactly what it was. This was a long time ago, but it was, right, some excuse or something that, and I have no way to verify what he's saying. I have no way to really check it. I have no way to know what's true or not, because as the young associate, you don't have access to the trust account. You don't have access to the checks or where the money is or where it's supposed to be. So you just kind of get this little bits of information, and you have to relay it because you have your own ethical duties. And then I think that was pretty much when I was like, I got to get out of here. And so I left. No job, no prospects. I think I went to LA for a month.
For a month?
What?
With all that student debt, just went to LA for a month.
I had nothing. I mean, I had nothing here in Vegas, really. I didn't have a job, and I've been applying for jobs. I go to LA and continue applying for jobs here in Vegas from LA, but no real plan. I'd gone to school, right? Gone to undergrad, I went to law school. Finally, got the job coming out, and then all the other interviews, all those had dried up, and so I had nothing right then. So I ended up going to LA for a month, and actually ended up working as like a paparazzi.
Oh, nice! Holy cow, that is an
Yeah.
awesome job.
Yeah,
Dang.
it was I will say the least. I saw a decent amount of celebrities.
Did you have a good camera or just your phone?
No, we had a camera. It was my other friends. I was kind of like tagging along. They had just moved out there from Vegas to Los Angeles, and so they were out there. So I just kind of joined up with them, and we were doing that.
So wait, so were you taking the pictures, or were you the one advising them as to whether or not they could take a picture, whether or not they could trespass on a certain property, or?
I was driving mostly. I mean, I took some pictures, and like I have some where I was like, these weren't very good, but I don't know if you remember Donald Driver. He was a wide receiver for Green Bay. He was on like Dancing with the Stars, and I got photos actually with me like in it where we were trying to film them, and so like, so there was like certain things like that. But I was there for like a month in LA.
Sounds like a really fun job. Like you're just out there hanging out, looking for celebrities.
It was interesting. I mean, you're kind of waiting for celebrities, and then there's like a lot of drama, and everyone's doing it, and I mean, it's sketch, right? I mean, was it fun a little bit? Sure. It's kind of cool to see these celebrities, know where they're hanging out, and all these things. But you feel kind of weird too, because you're kind of like,
Tom.
Yeah, I don't know if you're stalking, but it's definitely not stalking, right? I mean, because you're just waiting. You're basically waiting for them to show up or to leave their house, or whatever the case may be at that time.
So was that a step up or a step down after Barry, the paparazzi?
I mean, it was interesting, is what it was. I mean, I didn't make much more money than I was at Barry's. And luckily, I much like you, had a friend who was able to get me a job interview back in Vegas about a month later, and I came back and started working insurance defense until actually my friend who I went out there with, he died. He actually got hit by a car chasing Justin Bieber's vehicle.
Oh, whoa.
Yeah, so it was kind of a weird scenario where they were chasing Justin Bieber. This is like, I don't know, 10 years ago, probably more.
This is 2011?
This might be 2013, because I would have been, when he died, it would have been 2013. And so he was chasing Justin Bieber's car. And this is before Bieber was doing drugs, and or at least publicly. And they got him smoking weed or something. And but he was chasing him. They were on like one of the freeways in LA. He got out of his car to get some photos or something of the vehicle. He gets out, and when he gets out, a cop's there, and that's where it kind of gets murky. But no one really knows actually what happened at that point. I mean, and he got hit by some other lady and killed him. And then he actually got a lawyer, and the lawyer was able to recover, but only against her policy. And it's kind of like the body cam. I never really saw like the body cams and stuff like that, but like I think there was like issues with the body cams and the mics and kind of whatever happened out there.
Yeah, and the body cam, looking at the body cam when you have dead people at the scene is never fun, right? I mean, the cops try to do their best sometimes to blur it out, but it's never perfect. And even with the blurred out images, you know what's underneath.
Yeah, and so I didn't actually see them because I wasn't, it was happening in California. So even though I was a lawyer here, I was new. I was also, I was a 1-year attorney just doing insurance defense and what little I learned at Barry Levinson's. So I got the family, helped find them an attorney. But it, I guess the case against the police or, trying to get Justin Bieber or, any of those people involved never came to any fruition. And then it just turned out that the only policy was the lady who hit him. And so, but that's,
Yeah. Yeah, that's so tough. That's, when we talk about insurances, like insurance is never going to be enough when you have someone who loses their life, right? And sad story after sad story where someone not only doesn't have enough insurance, but has the minimum insurance. Right. Back in that time, it's probably 15,000. I think California even still is now, right? $15,000. Where
I don't know all the insurance, and I don't know ultimately all that stuff. I think there was, some confidentiality. Obviously insurance, and just the minimums is not enough, right? That's why, and I'm sure you do it, but I always tell my clients if you can get underinsured motorist coverage is super important. If and even then, it's never going to be enough if someone loses their life, right? So it's all about just trying to make it somewhat better for the family if you can.
Yeah, in a lot of situations, the insurance company just tries not to pay, even if it's the minimum policy, right? They try not to pay, and then all of a sudden, an attorney gets involved, and they realize that they've got to pay.
Yeah, the insurance, they never want to pay, right? They're always looking for a reason not to pay the money. They're always looking for an excuse. They're always looking for something to not pay money. Even now, right? It's probably got worse since then, obviously, But it's these insurance companies, they don't want to pay, right?
Yeah, and that, I went the same route. I went to an insurance defense firm. But still, the contrast between my first job as an attorney and my second job as an attorney is so stark. Like, the guy that I went to work for this, on my second job, not only was he paying me all the time, right? And he would pay me bonuses, pretty good bonuses, but he gave me all the tools I needed, all the knowledge I needed, encouraged me to go get additional education so that I could, not only work better for him, but and have success in the future. I had great staff, and beyond ethical. Like, this guy was beyond the ethics, where even though he worked for the insurance defense, he was always very cognizant of what people were going through on the other side of the plaintiff, what that person is actually going through. And it was such a great segue or a great mentorship for me as to what it means to be an attorney. Because here was a guy who had spent years defending the insurance companies and never got to the point where he became really jaded.
Wow, that's pretty impressive, because a lot of insurance lawyers, right, just drink the Kool-Aid, right? Or they, everyone's faking their injuries. Everyone's doing this, they just want money. But obviously in the majority of cases, that's not true, because if someone came in faking their injuries, I wouldn't represent them, as I'm sure you wouldn't either. And so that's very commendable for an insurance defense attorney to not get jaded by all that.
Yeah. And what about your second job, right? Other than being the paparazzi, you went to an insurance defense firm as well, right?
I went to
a larger, like I went to a solo practitioner.
Okay, yeah, I went to an insurance defense firm. I think there's about 20 lawyers in Vegas and maybe another like 50 or 60 in California. So obviously there was a lot more procedure in place, a lot less going to court, a lot more, writing and status reports, which is basically you just writing a report to the carrier about what's happened and, what you think the case is worth and where you need to go, and just writing a status report, which is pretty much the most boring thing you can do as a lawyer. You're just summarizing what's happened in the last 30 to 60 days. And if you don't do them, then they get upset with you.
Telling some other lawyer or some other adjuster that works directly for the insurance company.
Right. Just telling you, right, the adjuster that works for the insurance company. And that adjuster controls you as the insurance defense lawyer, because you can't take any costs. You can't really do any actions unless they approve it, because it's going to cost them money. So these insurance companies are tight with the purse strings, right? They don't want to pay money. I had an insurance company just today say that the impact was a minor impact, and we're closing the file because there's no way they could have been injured. And it's like, on what basis? Did you get a doctor? Did you get a biomechanic? Did you get anything? Or you just said, I'm an adjuster and I'm not going to pay on this one. But yeah, I did. I worked for an insurance company. And actually, one of the partners there got in trouble.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Dang. What? Anything you could share?
It's public knowledge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what did they get in trouble for?
Misappropriation of funds.
The same thing as Barry got in trouble for eventually.
Yeah, I think Barry.
Yeah.
Well, Barry was in trouble for that HOA stuff.
Did he get disbarred for the HOA stuff?
I think so, but it could have obviously been for the misappropriation of funds and probably the numerous bar complaints. But the attorney at the insurance firm, he doing reimbursements that he wasn't supposed to, and they ended up totaling hundreds of thousands of dollars. And he actually, I think, got disbarred or at least suspended. And so, but it was caught because there was a lot more institutional controls.
It was cut earlier where it was only a few $100,000 instead of, I think with Barry, it was millions.
Probably, yeah. There was a lot of, institutional controls. And so he was caught and, and the firm didn't cover for him like Barry, I'm sure, was covering for himself.
Yeah, and that's one thing that, I try to tell my clients, and when they sign up with me, is, hey, once your case settles, right, you don't get your money immediately. The money sits in a trust account, and I let them know this trust account is governed by the Nevada Bar, right? If the Nevada Bar wants to come in and audit it, there's a procedure. They can come in and they can audit it, and they can see what I've been doing with all the money in the client's trust account for quite a while. And I hope for the clients that instills a little bit of trust in them, letting them know that, hey, your money's going to sit safe. So when we settle cases, the money has to sit around for some time because we still have to determine how much to pay everybody. Sometimes it's a health insurance company or a doctor, and we just have to figure out what that is before we can disperse the money and give it to the client. And so from the get-go, I had advised them and let them know, hey, the money's going to sit in this account, and the state has access to it. The state has access to audit that account.
Right. And I'm sure you let them know when the money comes in, or when it's coming in, right? So that you're keeping them, again, communications and letting them know what's going on, which Barry did not do.
Yeah. In my retainer, there's a line that says that they provide me power of attorney, right? Power of attorney to execute the check or execute the release. But I've been practicing now going on 15 years, and only once have I signed for a client, and that's because he ended up moving to Mexico. And so, but what I ended up doing is sending him some documents saying, okay, reaffirming that I had power of attorney to sign the document on his behalf, and went through a whole process of it. Because I don't do that. And I think that's what Barry was probably doing, was signing.
He must have been, because none of the people knew about the checks or the money, or,
Right.
So I don't know exactly what he's doing, because, again, I wasn't privy to that, but he must have been doing something along those lines.
Right. Yeah. Well, David, it's been a pleasure having you on. And how can people reach you?
Thanks for having me on. They can reach me at my website at markmanlawfirm.com, or you can give me a call at 702-843-5899.
Okay.